Flames of hell! Burn, Chibi! Burn!
Hello everybody, it's vanburman here. Welcome back to another video, and today we're doing the Kessen 2 review. I have a very handy copy right here. Shouldn't have just clicked that. Never mind. And if you've been following the channel, you'll have seen the playthroughs that I've done. Didn't realise the first one was on beginner, but played through beginner with Liu Bei, and then played on normal with Cao, as he's called in this game. And then I went back and played with Liu Bei on expert as well. So I've been able to test all of the difficulties, all of the stages, not quite all of the stages because there are some with 3 choices and that kind of thing, but you know, I have played them all previously, so I feel quite empowered in order to be able to know how it is or how it isn't. If you want the TLDR, which I try to produce in these videos, often unsuccessfully, it's a great game. If you love strategy games, grand strategy games with a rich narrative, and there aren't too many of those, then this is currently one of the best ways you can get that. That, and also Kessen 1 to a smaller degree, but still decent game and very revolutionary for the time. So that's that. Yeah, initially I guess part of it was that it was a very formative video game for me, despite the fact it came out on PlayStation 2. But very much akin to those strategy games I really have loved to play. So I think about, you know, things like Total War Rome or Medieval 2, even the King Arthur game that came out that was trying to copy that, and then previously in my earlier years, if you like, also playing Command & Conquer. I know it's an RTS and that kind of thing, but there's some like similar veins there in terms of controlling armies and troops and tactics, formations, that kind of thing. Maybe not so much formations, but yeah. And this really sort of plays into that whole, like, because the premise of the Three Kingdoms story is a really rich, dense. Obviously, it's romanticized, but like it's a great source material to build things off of, and because in of itself it is a romanticization of history, and in that way it's kind of like history with fantasy, in a bit of a different way to that we see with Lord of the Rings, but the concept remains in the fact that there is this great source material that could have really good things done with it. In this instance, Kessen 2 is a really good example of that being done. You know, like even the I went through, obviously I'm not going to do it again, but went through the manual and the disc and all the inserts and everything else, and it just has so much care and love put in from the ground upwards. And I think you can see that just in terms of the characters' armour and the thought that's gone into the dialogue choices. I know sometimes almost like the translation that the voice actors were given, maybe not perfect, but I think I fully can excuse stuff like that, being someone that watches not a huge amount, because I don't watch a huge amount of films anyway, but you know, watches a lot of Eastern films, particularly stuff around the Three Kingdoms. So I'm going to put this down, but there was, because I don't want to just hold this and throw this around on screen the whole video, and I mentioned this before, but it was the winner for the PlayStation 2 Strategy Game of the Year. And if it will ever focus, I think you can probably just about make it out. But what are the key... I was thinking, how do I do this review? That for me was one of the big sticking points. Like, do I base it on my nostalgia? Do I base it compared to games out now? And the truth is that with the Kessen, particularly 1 and 2 games, there are no direct comparisons. They stand in like a field all by themselves. Now they may share some similarities in terms of, you could say Kessen 2 is some similarity to like Dynasty Warriors Empires, or actually that's probably the only one I can think of really. You know, because it is the same, it's taking the same source material and uses the same kind of characters and the same dynamics which are repeated. But in terms of the actual, like, having in one sense that like freedom to do what you want with your armies and formations and that kind of thing, and think about how you're gonna not quite spec your characters, because it's not quite as intuitive as that. But how you're going to develop your characters and their armies going forward, while also still maintaining such a rich narrative, even through each stage of the game. It almost feels like I'm trying to sell the game to you now, which I'm not, and at all. If you enjoy strategy games, though, this is kind of something that has to be experienced. It's the experience in order to understand, I feel. I don't know that it necessarily translates so well in terms of a let's play, so to speak. So that's worth considering, at least if you're a big fan of strategy games. And yeah, coming back to the original question, how am I going to judge it? So I'm probably because I've not recorded the last part of this video yet, but I'm probably going to talk about it from both aspects, because I think one of the big things for me, if I carry on this type of series and I do go back and play games that I've played before, it's kind of those key questions for me. Is it as good as I remember it being? Does it hold up today? And that's the really tricky one to answer. And then what is my overall score on it in totality? So, as I've not done these things before, this is kind of the barometer or the benchmark. It'd be interesting to see how we do with games that are not ones that I've previously enjoyed, and how whether the scoring is sort of congruent to that. Maybe not, we'll see. But I'm going to go into some more in-depth. We're going to see some footage, go through some examples if you've somehow missed all of the huge amounts of gameplay on the channel. There'll be some snippets in here from all aspects of it. I will say, though, before we go into that because at this moment in time, the expert playthrough isn't up yet. Expert in inverted commas, but that difficulty of playthrough. And I must admit, even though I wasn't recording it properly, that was the one I enjoyed the most. And I will go into that in a bit more detail when we go through the gameplay. But it's worth saying that was definitely my best experience of it, and that's also my core experience from when I played it before, because that's basically the only mode I played on that I can remember. Been a very long time since I played through the beginner campaign prior to a couple of weeks ago. So anyway, let's get into it.
So I'm going to start with the story aspect. I've mentioned this already, and will do again in the future, but it takes on the use of the Romance of the Three Kingdoms story, and does a sort of interpretized history, or interpretized romance of the romance, I suppose. All the key themes are there: the heroism, the bit larger than life characters, the warlord aspect, and the fanciful, I guess, larger than life characters that exist within the story. And that's shown through lots of different aspects in the game, whether it's the reinforcements, the in-game cutscenes, the pre-war council, just everything, even down to the abilities that the generals use in battle as well. Really helps give you that feeling of what characters are all about. They're also very distinctive, very recognizable as well. They've got their own style, and there's the level of detail and attention to detail in the voice lines and in the models and weapons and all that kind of stuff it's basically immaculate. So there could be more characters in the Three Kingdoms. There's hundreds and hundreds of generals, commanders, diplomats, that kind of thing, that all played really important parts in there. But they've chosen, a handful from all the three kingdoms and decided to really run with them and really flesh them out. And I think, we're seeing the duel here between Zhang Fei and Jia Yuan, and those two have a kind of rivalry, or at least Zhang Fei does, with Jia Yuan's son, because, spoiler alert, in this story, Zhang Fei kills Jia Yuan. And that's, I guess, in the Three Kingdoms, a lot of people do die, believe it or not. I know, shocking. Zhang Fei, Guan Yu, Liu Bei all die throughout the whole entire story, and Cao Cao as well. It just, time moves on, right? It spans quite a large time period, and people's life expectations were fairly low, I suppose, or would have been, particularly at a time of turmoil. And unfortunately, the only one bit we explore is Jia Yuan's demise. But it's nice to have that in there, because it makes it more true to to the source material and the fact that, you know, there is this loss and grief that also takes place at this time. They're not invincible generals, even though the majority of them are fairly persistent in the story. But yeah, I think like that side is also needed to be told for a game that's like, I think, a 12 plus. I don't know. I'm trying to look around for the case now, but I haven't got it on me. Yeah. So I think in terms of like the story, fleshing out the characters and bringing all that together, the game does a really good job of that, and it's a good entry point into the sort of story of the Three Kingdoms. And we even get like minor characters playing like a bigger role, I suppose, as well. Like, for example, we've got Zhu Shu, a very, you know, prominent general, at least at the start of Liu Bei's formation, or moving towards forming Shu. There's a bit of politics and stuff involved with him and his mother and Cao Cao and all the rest of it, which is quite interesting, actually. And, you know, one of the like early intrigue bits in the story as well. We don't get that in this game, but it's alluded to, and I think like that's really nice. It's clear that whoever has written the story for Kessen 2 at least understands the overarching story of the Three Kingdoms and has tried to, you know, just make it a bit more fun, I suppose. So yeah, story-wise, it's not for the purists, I would say, by far, but it does enough and is true enough to the characters that it does depict. So if we've got the story down, how about the strategy elements? So on the face of it, it can look fairly simple. You have your little units that you move around the battlefield, engage with the enemy, change formations, depending on what kind of troops you have in your unit. And yeah, like not too complicated. I guess the nice thing about it is it sort of takes on that Dynasty Warriors feel of like having really, I guess, I don't know what the word you would call it, like quite geological maps. In the case of, you know, like in Total War, there might be like a hill or a river crossing, that kind of thing. Like they're fairly notable, I guess. Whereas in every stage, basically, of Kessen, there are some geological differences or paths that you have to take, for example, that force the game into being able to get through the narrative and the like intrigue of that stage. So it stops it from being just like a battle between two blobs of units against each other. And that means actually to be successful at this in a strategy game, you have to plan your troop movements far more meticulously to get the best out of it. And while it's a double-edged sword, kind of, because we've got the naval battles, which I'll talk to a little bit more later, but they're very much around their positioning and not allowing your ships to be flanked by other ships, because you can't intercept them, you can't split your forces, but you are still on a fairly like wide open bit of water. Of course, you're on the Yellow River, so it's kind of tricky. But they have still put some consideration in, so there are still some geological, like little islands that you can use in order to be able to position your troops, you know, better as well. It's probably a bit more. It is a lot more difficult because they all fight on their own individual ships, which means you can't use your abilities as much. You don't get different formations, obviously, because your troops are just on like a transport ship. And I think like because naval battles, obviously Chibi is one of the big naval battles in the story. Like there is a kind of need for there to be some kind of naval battle, and I think while it's not perfect, I think Kessen 2 have done a decent enough job of being able to do that. It just means you are less sort of using your like dueling ability, and magic is a lot more like sporadic and difficult to use on ships, particularly when you've not got Cao Cao's ships making that like straight base across the whole like, battle area effectively to make it a bit more like a land battle. So yeah, I mean, it could be a bad thing, or you could see it as actually this is part of the strategic side of the game where I'm then choosing like how I will set up my ships and my formations and my troops to get the best out of the limitations that are being imposed upon me purely by the fact that we're, you know, on water rather than on land. So yeah, I don't really have, I think it's kind of a necessary evil, and I don't really, or I've never been able to, at least in my time, think how they would be able to do it better and still do the naval battles. And, you know, it sort of speaks in stark contrast to the fact that you've got Total War Three Kingdoms, who didn't even bother with, need to double check myself here, but didn't even bother with naval battles at all, from what I recall. I think you could just use the rivers as like transportation, so you could move your units on the world map on the rivers, but not actually have the fight. And I guess like that's the big thing that the game doesn't give you, is that kind of really like granular control of where you attack, how you're attacking. But it's because it is more of a story-based strategy with like obviously predefined stages rather than a big world map where you get to decide what happens. And I think you probably have to, you know, some games do it very well in terms of you being able to weave your own narrative, weave your own story. Things like Crusader Kings, for example, does that really well through succession and building an empire over a long time and that kind of thing. Whereas, you know, if you want to tell the Three Kingdoms story, you need to have it neatly defined. And I think Dynasty Warriors has always done that fairly well with their stages as well, because it sort of simplifies the process of being able to like have those cutscenes. And, you know, there's been some attempt at doing that with the Empires series, where they've had like more dynamic cutscenes where any character can basically interact with, they're basically just dropped into that cutscene, right? But you don't then get the same dynamics and rivalries and that kind of thing developing that you do, for example, in Kessen. So I was going to talk about the magic as well and abilities. So much to talk about. So one of the big modifiers that you've got in the game are your special abilities that you can use. There's 3 types of general, basically. And I can't remember what they are now. One's a warlord, a magician, and then like a hybrid warlord magician type thing. So they have like different classes of abilities. And there are some variation between the two factions, between Shu and Wei. So Shu tend to have, or do have, the fireball technique, and Wei have the hail, so like ice, fire and ice basically. Although in this Wei are red and have ice, and yeah, but still it allows you to differentiate between those two characters and kind of maybe tells you where they fit as well, and those little subtle hints. So once again, I don't really want to talk about Zhu Shu the whole time, but if we think about Zhu Shu, who is been on the screen in this particular video, he has hail and fireball, thereby denoting that he is sort of half Wei, half Shu, which in the story he is. You know, he's more ideologically aligned with Liu Bei, but he ends up being coerced into joining with Cao Cao. So he's like both sides of it, right? And then you have abilities that span across the two as well, like the meteor showers, gale, lightning, and fissure, all very powerful magic attacks that, you know, do change the tide of battle, particularly on the normal and beginner difficulties. And by the time you get to expert, they're absolutely crucial. And you'll see me having to take the very, I guess, meaningful actions in order to be able to get my opponent to use Iron Wall, for example. So I'll use my lesser abilities, lesser in quotations, magic abilities first to try and bait the AI into saying I'm going to Iron Wall that because that looks dangerous enough, knowing then that I have like a fissure or a lightning in my back pocket to use after that would hopefully do more damage. And that's sort of kind of how you adds to the strategic nature of the battles. It's then, you know, if you've got your warlord general, so to speak, you can use a charge or a rush where, you know, you're doing you can do just as much damage as your magic can, but there's no way for it to be blocked. I think there's also the other thing as well in terms of like troop types as well that I definitely had forgotten about prior to playing this again, in the fact that it's a lot more difficult to do damage, particularly with magic, to horse troops. I don't know, I mean, it's obviously a choice that's been made for tactical reasons. I don't know if horses are more resistant to magic in lore or anything than not, although magic's a bit of an abstract concept anyway. Yeah, but you sort of have to weigh that with the fact of, there's horse troops, there's less of them, but they're worth more in terms of my like troop score, so to speak. And how do I balance that with then wanting to do loads of damage using my magic? So you probably try and target your magic at the non-cavalry troops if you can. But, you know, there is that element of strategy required there to get the best out of your abilities. And the only way you will win on like expert mode, for example, is by getting the best out of your abilities and your troop formations and troop formations not so much, but where you position your troops on the battle map. So where you do your double ups, where you sort of maybe accept a tactical loss, for example, from time to time. Whereas in the other modes, particularly like when you in your first playthrough, there's not really that sense of same sense of jeopardy, I suppose. It's fairly likely that you will win if you do keep Liu Bei, for example, out of harm's way. That's usually enough to whether you'll win the most optimally and get the most experience for your guys and therefore level them up as well as you could do. Well, probably not. But, it is worth, I guess, noting that there are those extra layers to your consideration of how you do your battles, who you let win, whether you, and I did this quite a lot in my playthrough, of not just defeating Cao Cao or whoever the enemy general is to get the stage over with, sort of pulling out of battle with them to beat their other units and totally wipe out their entire army so that I get the most efficiency for the battle that I'm in. And you don't have to play it like that, of course. I mean, we're talking about, by the time you get to the final stage, an extra ability, maybe an extra ability across, 6 or 7 commanders, rather than it being an absolute necessity to do so. And I think because they all have these set abilities that they can learn, it kind of really doesn't matter that, like, if Zhang Fei doesn't have battle cry by the time I get to the final battle, that I'm therefore not going to be able to win the final battle. And that's not really how it works at all, but it would make defeating a unit that's on the verge of losing so much easier. So there is that as well. The game also gives you the ability to go back and retry stages when you've lost. It doesn't say like, oh, you're a loser. It says, it does say you're a loser, but let's go do it again. You do carry across a small amount of the experience you've got if you've defeated enemy units as well, which allows you to advance. Doesn't make things in any way easier, at least not materially anyway. You might get the odd troop increase, and that's about it. But it gives you the opportunity for you to go and try a different strategy. And by the time you get to expert, you are redoing all the bits yourself and following some vague strategy that you've agreed on ahead of time. So we're seeing quite a lot of the naval battles here, which I did want to highlight because it is, notwithstanding what I've said before, it is one of the more deficient parts of the game, quite frankly. I wouldn't say it's not been done well, but I haven't had any, I haven't played anything since where it's been done better. I guess that's kind of what I would say. Even the way that, Total War has tried to do it, with some success, to be honest. But I've never really found the naval battles all that engaging. I haven't found a game where naval battles are a lot of fun. And I think for this type of setting of the game environment, it's very difficult. I personally think the films have done a good job with it, like Red Cliff, for example, but trying to translate that into video game format is one of the more tricky aspects. And we've also just saw there, so I'm watching this while I'm talking about it to give me prompts. We had Marsu there, where he was stuck on his ship and not able to move. So I found that happens a lot with the naval battles, and I think it is a bug. It's a bug that is in there, and obviously, well, it's not going to be patched out because the game is printed onto a disc. But it makes a more frustrating battle experience more frustrating. For example, particularly when you're not able to move those particular units that that might have Firestorm, for example, where you can attack another ship that's not in your direct vicinity, and if your character's stuck, you can't move for you to be able to best position yourself. Therefore, you're losing some of the strategic advantage that you might be able to have. There's a couple of little bugs as well. I guess obviously worth talking about. Like sometimes when you do a charge or a rush, your guys won't line up in time or line up effectively, and then end up not coming with you on the rush or the charge, and then maybe your general gets stuck halfway through the charge as well. Generally, though, if you've picked a good if you picked a good line for your charge or your rush, you will still do a good amount of damage. It just doesn't look as good, I suppose. And then there's the other frustration when you're moving your general into battle and they sort of weave in and out of your archers, or they skirt around the side of the enemy units, and you're not actually in battle. The game is putting your unit into the battle, and it's not working, and it takes a long time, all that sort of stuff. So yeah, they're some of the smaller. I mean, I think they are definitely bugs that weren't ironed out beforehand, but they're quite minor. And I would say on the sea battles, or sorry, the river battles, they happen every river battle, but it doesn't happen every single stage with your units not being able to engage properly. It probably does happen every single battle with at least one charge or one rush, or maybe a couple of them. That's probably the one that's most prevalent, I would say. But I am fairly forgiving of stuff like that. I remember when, like, for example, Rome 2 came out and there were lots of bugs and glitches, and it was kind of like, yeah, we're playing a really big, like, fantasy, or not fantasy, but war-based game with lots of units on the screen, and there of course are going to be some issues with it. So I don't criticize that kind of stuff too heavily. It's just where it breaks the game, or it could lead to you losing a battle, which I don't feel as though any of that stuff has ever done that. Like, all the troop positionings as well, the AI doesn't quite move your units as optimally as you would want. You could look at that two ways, as though that is a deficiency of the game engine, or maybe, as I tried to see it, like, because they are subtle movements that need to be done, it's therefore down to you to take control of that unit and control it and move it into that, like, niche space in order to either have that 2v1 or to put you closer to a mountain or the hill so that you can't be flanked, for example. So they're the kind of things that I would, like, take away from it. I don't think it's all a problem. I think some of it adds to the strategic value that you can have from playing through and playing the stages and trying to ultimately defeat the crafty AI, particularly on expert mode as well. I mentioned that a few times, but I really, really enjoyed the expert mode difficulty. Maybe this is a good time to talk about it, and the fact that the game is very heavily stacked against you, and particularly playing as Liu Bei, that makes perfect sense. Like, Cao Cao has the bigger army, the more experienced generals, the infrastructure, not necessarily, kind of the political will behind him, because he's ruthless, right? I'd rather destroy the world, or whatever his quote is about destroying the world, or than let the world hurt me, effectively. Can't dig that one out for you, because I don't think it's actually in this game, but it's a well done phrase. And yeah, and I think that you are fighting against adversity, you're fighting against the odds, and that really shines through on expert mode in the way that on normal and, like, beginner that you get put on when you first start the game. It is more about the story and about learning the gameplay and learning the strategy. And I think, like, for a first time player, that's the right way to do it. You only become au fait with understanding the nuances of it by being able to have the space and time to experiment, in the game itself. I think I'm not saying that other games don't do that well. Lots of them do, but the fact that Kessen also does that quite well, and it's a much older game, I think it's quite user friendly. It doesn't hold your hand, and there's some stuff that I didn't realise in terms of how archer generals work when they're not in battle, how you get them to fire on other units and that kind of thing. It was just something that I knew existed. I didn't know necessarily how to activate it and that kind of thing. So yeah, you pick up that and you work your way up to being that expert level. And then, even though there's been stages on expert that I've won having all of my units, none of my units lost. Everyone is, like, good morale. Troop numbers may be quite low, for example, but you could look at it in one way as though, like, I've completely won this stage, no problem whatsoever. But there's always those moments, even when you win a stage quite handily, where it's like, actually, that was the turning point. And that's where things could have gone really wrong. And that, in a way, is how I've always felt, always been one of Total War's strengths, but it's prevalent here as well. And it's no guarantee that you will win at all on expert mode, and even on normal, for example, particularly where you've got battles that aren't just you have to defeat the enemy general, you have to get to this point, or you have to stop a unit getting to this point. Those ones do add that extra level of strategy where you have to prioritize different things. And the few that I did that when I was playing as Cao Cao trying to chase down Liu Bei, I didn't chase him down efficiently enough, and therefore lost that stage twice in a row. And I'm someone who is quite clearly fairly adept at the game and understands its mechanics and how it operates and how it wants you to play. But because, I'd been playing for a whole of the Liu Bei campaign where basically, other than that one particular thing, you are still trying to beat the enemy general. And you're trying to escape rather than stopping the escape. It's a very different dynamic to spin it on its head. And I think that's probably one of the good things that actually, and I haven't touched on at all, is the fact that you do get to play both sides of the coin. And you get to play with all of the enemy generals and see it from both sides. And you always, obviously, you get that twist in the Cao Cao campaign that you don't see in the Liu Bei campaign. And it does help flesh out Cao Cao's character rather than just being this one-dimensional villain. And does add some jeopardy. I mean, it's not very realistic at all in terms of the narrative thread that they've gone down compared to the source material. But I see why they've done it, even if it's potentially a little bit clumsy. I mean, I think in theory it might have been better as like a love triangle type thing. But anyway, I'm not going to criticize that at all too much. But I think that the majority of the story and the characters and their interactions are really well done. I think, a lot of that is down to the fact that there's great source material. And I mentioned that a few times, and I think that is what does carry it. I mean, I think this formula could be used for other things as well, and it would work. Any sort of 100 Years War or stuff like that might be really good in this. I know they went more down the Bladestorm route, but yeah, it could have been done as a Kessen game and been really good as well. Kessen means decisive battle, and I think every stage they've done a really good job of showing why each one is in fact a decisive battle.
And there you have it. There's the Kessen 2 review. The conclusion bit's obviously the most important. I gave it to you at the start and I said it's, absolute, almost transcend generational games in terms of particularly the strategy genre. There's nothing that comes close. Made the point about Dynasty Warriors Empires, which I kind of feel is very tentative and sort of like the closest thing we could come to when it comes to trying to compare Kessen 2 to anything, I guess, slightly more modern, because Empires has kind of lasted throughout the years, whereas the Kessen series didn't, much to my disappointment overall, but maybe some things are best left where they are, which I think I've kind of realised a lot more over the last few years, I would say. But not to get too much into that, I want to talk about how it compares to what I remember, how it compared to now, because it's been a heck of a long time, 23, nearly 24 years since Kessen 2 came out. A lot of games have come and gone in that time, particularly in the strategy sphere. So, how is it compared? How are my rose-tinted glasses holding up? And having played it now, and also I should say, because I played it on the PS3 with the PlayStation 2 actual hardware in the system, I haven't played it on an emulator or upscaled it or any of the tweaks that you could get from modern emulation. I've played it the way it was meant to be, sort of meant to be played. Obviously meant to be played on the PS2, but for the majority of, for all that matters, it played as it was meant to be played. And I think it holds up incredibly well, like surprisingly well. Even the graphics, and you can tell throughout the game where they've sort of had to down-res the individual units in order to be able to get it to run properly. And there were some noticeable slowdowns, particularly for like big stratagems, what do they call them? Special moves, that kind of thing. But all understandable and all designed to help the game work. I feel as though it was definitely pushing a lot of the boundaries in terms of, from what I can remember anyway, from like graphics, from a graphics point of view. Came out roughly the same time as like Final Fantasy X, which also did the same type of thing as well. Was a real big step up, particularly if you look at Kessen 1 to Kessen 2, for example. That's probably the biggest jump, the biggest way to emphasise that jump up in graphic performance. But yeah, and I think just playing it now, having played other games, and particularly when I think about the Three Kingdoms Total War game that I was extremely excited for, and quite disappointed. Like, it was fine and it did some stuff well, but the Kessen game is like night and day above that in most aspects. I know the textures and stuff aren't as good, but how many nameless, like not nameless, nameless is the wrong one, how many faceless characters are there in Total War Three Kingdoms? They're all just generic people. There's no story to why, or there is story, but there's no background as to why these characters existed. I almost felt as though in Three Kingdoms you needed like they do in the Dynasty Warriors game, an encyclopedia to tell you who these characters are, why they're important, who they're aligned to, what their motivations were. And we don't get any of that at all, really, in Three Kingdoms, outside of the characters that have faces. Now, the great thing about how they've done it in Kessen 2 is all of the characters have faces. They all have some amount of exposition. Even if you only like meet them once when they're joining your faction, they still might get in a duel and they'll refuse a duel, or they'll do their magic attack, or they'll do a rally, that kind of thing. Like, you get some voice lines from them, you get some personality, and you just don't get that same thing in like the next really big budget strategy Three Kingdoms game. And when I think that that's like the main comparison, Kessen 2 has like not only held up to how I saw it when I played it 20 odd years ago, 23, 24, is it 25? No, 23 years ago, nearly 24. Yeah, I can only think that it's actually better now because we didn't continue on that same trend of building the story up in the same way, and it's not been done with the like Three Kingdoms story, so to speak, which is a bit of a shame. So I think about like, yeah, okay, the Kessen 2 story is a bit goofy when you know the actual story behind Romance of the Three Kingdoms and all the rest of it, but it's got like enough there where you care about it, and the battles are there to add that I'm going to say stress and sort of like desperate situation that Liu Bei's fighting for to even like stay in the war, right? And that is totally and utterly exemplified just by the first battle on expert mode, where you're fighting the Battle of Shu, and it's the one that you've played the tutorial of, and you've won easily because the game is teaching you how to use the mechanics and just how to move your unit around and all that sort of stuff. And you're like, there you've got 3 units against 2 or against 1 ostensibly, and you're gonna lose. You are absolutely gonna lose. You've got like 4,000 troops, yeah, Hao Yuan's got 8,000, he's got way more morale, he's like the best general in the game. And the only thing that can save you, I totally forgot that he was coming, because I always think it's later on, but Zhao Yun comes, right? One of the biggest characters in the whole of the Romance of the Three Kingdoms story. He's been very pushed by films, media, games, that kind of thing. Really, like there's a game that came out just to start this year that's about Zhao Yun. I think it's like a modification on his story basically. And without him coming to reinforce Liu Bei in the battle, you don't win that. There's no way. You haven't got enough abilities or enough stratagem or enough anything to be able to win that battle. And at the end of it he says something along the lines of like, my eyes did not deceive me, like they won by the merest something or other, like by a whisker type of thing. Can't remember the exact line. That's unfortunate for this video.
They drove off Cao Cao's onslaught in just the merest heartbeat. So there, I guess my eyes were not deceiving me.
Like, you feel that, and you feel that story, and you feel because you've already gone through it once, you know what it means when Zhao Yun says that, and you go through that first battle again. And maybe before I decided I was going to play the expert mode, I might have had a bit more of a pessimistic outlook, because through my voice playthrough, I sort of felt the game was a bit too easy and a bit too almost hand-holdy. Whereas when you get to expert, you have to do everything yourself. You don't really follow the strategies that are laid out. Yeah, okay, there might be a few tweaks in general, overall game plan, but the minutiae is done by you, the setup, who you engage in battle, when you use your abilities. Admittedly, later on it's become a bit more of a ability fest, but like you've earned through your experience and winning battles to be able to have those abilities to go out and use them against your foes. So it really feels as though you get that progress through the story and through how the characters develop. Oh gosh, that's a lot to talk about, but you know, very passionate about Kessen 2, more so now that it's played. The game disc is out on my PS3, it's back in the case. I think that's probably the last. I'll play it for at least a good while, but I thoroughly enjoyed my time with it. Because it's been so long, it kind of feels a bit more fresh, even though I still remember everything, or most stuff I should say, from the game. So yeah, like I say, my conclusion is that it's better than it was when I was younger. I think there was more optimism about what might come in the future. If you had said to me at that age that basically this style of game is never going to be repeated, and the few things that come close, even in 23 years' time, won't have topped this, I'd have been quite disappointed, actually. And I think on a general side, I've realised how much actually that early PS2 era is, and end PS1 era is like kind of a golden era in gaming that I think we will look back on with that sentiment a lot more, I feel. So yes, originally I was thinking, does it hold up today? I guess that's the other question. Yes, if this came out today on Steam, I would absolutely play it because it fits in. It would pique all the same interest of things that I enjoy anyway. I would play it, I'd probably go, you know what, the textures aren't quite as good, and all these claims about having loads of people on screen is a bit funny. Not that maybe they wouldn't advertise it that way now, because it's been done quite a lot since. But yeah, I would thoroughly enjoy it, and I would say that, I mean, I'd probably give it a 9 now, if it came out today on Steam for me to buy. But overall, when I consider the rose-tinted glasses effect, and I consider the history as well, how well it's held up, how good it was for its time, and that basically how much fun and enjoyment I had going back and revisiting it, that for me was just, I don't know, it's just the icing on the cake, was playing the bonus level just the night before I'm filming this on Expert, and it's just like, yeah, just brilliant, absolutely brilliant. So I'm kind of torn between 9.5 and a 10, which I realise is extremely high praise for me. I usually do devalue slightly, and I always think I should devalue a little bit more as well. But I'm going to give it 9.5, and I'm going to. These are going to be criticisms, ones I've already made, but just to round it off, I think there is something to do with the voice lines and the voice actors that I think is slightly off from time to time. It takes you out of it a little bit. I think that there is a bit more that especially could be done with the formations and the depth of the strategy. I think that was, so these things are actually within their control. Some of the textures, I don't know if it was because I was playing on PS3, were sort of like missing, like if you look at Mei San-yon's cheek, for example, she's like missing this square out of her cheek. Like small minor things, and obviously the slowdown on the abilities. I don't know that those graphical and performance issues could have been resolved because of how old the hardware was, but particularly in like fleshing out their formations, structure, process a little bit more would have been great. And then also, yeah, the bit about the voice lines, I think most of them are delivered really well, but there are a few where you're like, oh, okay, you didn't say the right thing there. Like Pong Tong. Pong Tong's allies come. Who the heck's Pong Tong? Oh, Pang Tong, okay. But totally threw me. That was more funny, though, than anything. So I think that's kind of where I am with it. They're very minor criticisms, but that sort of stops it from being like perfect. And I think 10 is going to be really tricky to give. Maybe Final Fantasy 9's a 10. Anyway, you didn't hear me say that, but I'm not planning on doing a review on that. But I hope you enjoyed the video. I never realised it's been a long one, but it is a passion. This is a passion video for me, for sure. And in future ones, I'll try and, as I've already done other videos, of review videos, but I'll try and keep them a bit more concise. But yeah, I hope that some of my love has come through in this video and in the playthroughs, because I've had a great time playing through it once again, and it's reignited my interest in the Three Kingdoms stuff. There's a few films I haven't watched that I'm going to go away and watch now, that have either come out since I last watched some of the films or what have you. So yeah, it's a great story, and well, the story in Kessen 2 is a little bit goofy. Yeah, the gameplay's really good. If you're a big fan of strategy games, go ahead. It's got to at least be like an 8 out of 10, because there's not really anything else like it. So, I've been vanburman. Thank you very much for watching. Hope you enjoyed. Let me know what you think in the comments, and I'll see you all very soon. Bye for now.